I'm going to talk about unexpected life lessons from my FitBIt. And so I want to thank Ernesto and Gary for letting me talk tonight. Okay, so I'm a designer. I've been self-employed for over 10 years. I work out of my house, and so I have a very short commute. And but because I work out of my house, I really make an effort to be active. I have a dog. I walk twice a day, and I had been doing a lot of Bikram yoga when this story started last spring. So I got a FitBIt, and I didn't really have anything in particular I was intending to do with it. I actually won it, so it was like, well, okay, I'll just see what happens with this. And I suppose in hindsight, I probably thought I was going to get confirmation of what a fit person I am. So if you guys, I don't know if you're familiar with the FitBIt readings, but it's kind of a typical day. So I had like 11,000 steps and 5 miles. I was like, okay, that's pretty good. And then you have the timeline, and then the pie chart at the bottom, which I've taken to calling the humble pie chart, shows how active I actually was, which is 20 hours of being sedentary and 38 minutes of being very active for a 24-hour period. So that was a little humbling for me. And then we'll look at the timeline. And so I started counting up kind of, like everything besides like a 10 or 15 minutes when I was sitting. So a typical day, I am sitting for 390 minutes, which is 6.5 hours. And that was also pretty surprising for me. And I started putting some pieces together. I've been having some mysterious leg pains while sitting for a while that were getting worse, that I was thinking I probably should start paying attention to. And it was a pain in my right hamstring when I was sitting for long periods of time, and it was starting to get worse. And I had a friend who had a really bad sciatica attack, and she was describing the symptoms to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's exactly what I'm having, except like on a much lower scale. And so being a self-quantifier, I went the next step and self-diagnosed that I had sciatica, and I didn't have health insurance at the time, so that was part of why I hadn't been, seeking any official medical help. But so I just started reading these stories about how sitting is bad for you for long periods of time. And I also was at the QS conference and saw Ernesto's presentation, which was also about the dangers of sitting, and he talked about how he built this active desk. And so, I'm like, okay, I work at home, I'll build this, I can do this. So I went out and bought a used treadmill off of Craigslist, and bought some industrial shelving and made a desk. And the great thing about this system that I then, with Ernesto's help, kind of with some advice, was that I was able to literally build, because of these industrial shelving, able to literally build the shelving around the desk, around the treadmill, so I didn't have to modify the treadmill. And the thing that so as you can see, kind of like the little pegs are like every inch or two, so I was able to like make it at kind of the perfect setup with, working around the display. And the problem I had was that the display, of course, was at an angle, but I realized I had like a little piece of shelving from something else where the keyboard is on the white shelf, and so that was like a perfect solution for the keyboard. So that was pretty awesome. So I have this great treadmill desk, but I was getting ready to start a full-time graduate school program, so I had to leave my treadmill desk and start commuting from San Francisco to Berkeley. And I was interested to see. I felt like I was more active. I was doing a lot more cycling and my commute and stuff. So the initial view is that my step count had gone from like 11,000 to 18,000. So I was like, oh my God, I'm so much more active. That's awesome. But then when you look at the humble pie chart, it's really not very much different. And then when I added up the time I'm sitting, it ended up actually being just about 7 hours a day, which is because grad school involved a lot of sitting around on other people's schedule for hours at a time. So my treadmill desk wasn't really doing me a lot of good now. But the good thing was I had health insurance, so I started getting physical therapy, and I have really seen a lot of improvement. So that's kind of the end of that story right now. So to talk now about the lessons I learned from this process. So it was really pretty shocking because I consider myself a pretty health conscious person to realize I had been doing something for years that had been harming my body, and that was a pretty humbling thing to become aware of. And I think also because I had really invested in my self-image as an active person, I had been ignoring the signs I was getting. So it really took the hard data that the FitBIt provided to make me really understand the situation, and it really gave me a new definition of fitness. So now I really see fitness as not just the workout, but the how I spend my entire time during the day and my activity patterns, and that is there's a really significant change in my perspective of my life that I will really carry with me through the rest of my life. And I kind of, part of this process, nothing kind of spurs personal growth as much as pain does, as a lot of you know. So I think that kind of being able to see all this transformation and make these changes in my life is really kind of a magical moment when you kind of start to see these things, these pieces of fall into place. And I think, I'm studying information technology in my graduate program, and so this was a real lesson for me. It's about how I can take this information and improve my life and really, take this to heart. It's not something someone else taught me. It was information that I kind of was able to piece together on my own. And I'm not, a number cruncher, and I'm not a real data geek. So that it was able to do this with so little effort on my part was really, really kind of insightful, because I've come into self-quantified stuff, but I'm not really a self-quantifier. So anyway, so I feel like I'm kind of, second generation of self, when it's starting to hit the mainstream, even I can find some innovation from self-quantifying. So, so that's it. That's my story. Thanks very much for letting me talk.
Okay, I have a question to start out with, which is, if you were asked before you did this, how much time out of 24 hours do you usually sit? What do you think you would have said?
4 hours?
Wow.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Wow.
Because I'm self-employed, I don't have to, so I'm getting up, going and, watering the plants, and so, yeah. So I was really...
You were really off.
Off
Yeah.
without a clue. Yeah,
This
absolutely.
is great in connection with what Simon was saying about, you don't even know what your posture
Yeah.
is. But a posture is much more complex. So, if you don't even know when you're sitting or when you're standing, which I think is totally plausible. I'm sure I'm asking myself that question,
Well, and I talked
really
after last session, our short meeting last week. The guy from Philips, is he here? From the device?
Jerome, no, he's not here. Yeah.
And he was saying to me that their device, which is not dissimilar from the FitBIt, they actually kind of advise people, and he was like, they would say to people, okay, you went to the gym at 6 a.m., which is what I was doing. I was going to yoga at 6 a.m., and, but you come and you sit at your desk for the next 12 hours, and that's a little bit of a problem. People don't want to hear it. So I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So I'm, I was like, oh, I'm not alone. But this is oh, no, I'm a fit person. This is not a problem for me. It's well, something you might want to think about.
Okay, so now I wish he were here. He's often here, because that's really interesting. That because their theory at Philips with Direct Life is you need to hear this from another person. And if you hear it from another person, it's actionable in a way that it's not if you're interacting with a machine. And yet the lesson that you just brought was, I would like to ask you, I'd like to say, Sharon, is that true? It's when people hear this from their coach, they don't want to hear it. Because the lesson you brought was somehow about seeing it for yourself.
Well, and seeing the physical manifestation, of course, was oh yeah, this is something I need to kind of. And I had been having these symptoms increasing for a year, but I had been ignoring them and discounting them.
So you had symptoms, and that's a big right.
Yeah.
Symptoms will do it. Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's take some questions. Yes.
You said previously that previously I thought I was a health conscious individual, and then you had the humble pie or whatever.
Yeah.
And now then you mentioned, I think in your second to last slide, that you realize that that your fitness, which I guess you equate with health,
Yeah.
is really a measure of your activity through the day. So I guess my question for you is, if you were to quantify the change in way that you measure and value your health, what terms would those be in?
I guess I'm not exactly sure.
So you thought you were healthy here, and now you're healthy.
Oh, now I know I'm much
you
more
know you're
health
healthy
conscious.
until the next measure
Yeah.
comes
I feel like I have a
along,
much
it's
more.
humble pie.
I feel like I have a much more holistic view, and I feel like
So, but if you were to quantify what that is, what are you taking into consideration now, aside from, you see what I'm saying? Like,
well,
is there an increased energy that goes along with moving around more during the day? Do you feel better about yourself? Are there these things that you can quantify that go along with what you're talking about?
I have to say, just because I've gone through such a huge life change with going back to school and after being self-employed for 10 years, so I mean, it's like there's so much going on that's different, but I guess I just really carry with me kind of the awareness that I have seen this pattern and made some changes, and so I guess I don't have an answer to that. Really having a way to quantify that.
Great. David.
Question about your homemade desk.
Uh-huh.
When these first came out, like at the Consumer Electronics Show or something like that, I was kind of spastic trying to type and do a treadmill and all of that.
Yeah.
So is your productivity different? I get that there are health things, but can you give me a sense of...
Well, here's the thing. Actually,
of
the thing I did not add to that lessons learned is that I really a standing desk is really awesome, and if somebody is interested in making that change, I could recommend a standing desk because that's really what I use it more as is a standing desk. I do, and partly because I'm in my crazy schedule and being in school and stuff, but I do find I hadn't. If I was still working at home, I think I would have kind of gone over that gap where I was able to kind of figure out how to really work on it. And every time I'm let's say I'm Friday and Saturday, I'm standing and working for 3 or 4 hours throughout the day. And maybe one of those I'll have the treadmill on, but then I have to go to the bathroom, and then I just don't turn it back on when I come back. So, definitely better for me for reading and stuff that's not really certain types of reading and kind of rote work,
Right.
So.
Alec.
So I'm curious about your emotional reaction to seeing those charts. Like if you're walking 8 miles a day, I think that's pretty good. And then to have the thing tell you that you're not doing enough.
Yeah,
Doesn't
that was really weird. It's like this doesn't compute. It really took me a while.
Does that make you, I would beat myself up about that when really 8 miles I should be happy with.
Yeah.
So did it have a negative effect on your self-efficacy or self-esteem to see that?
Oh, really? I just kind of think those charts are bullshit.
Wait a second. No. Okay, let's
But here's the thing. I will say, I did give it to my boyfriend. I was like, you wear this for a couple days. And he actually works for a living. He does maintenance. And I was like, oh, I'm sure you'll be really close to where I was. So I'm a really active person. And he came back and he was like 7 hours a day, mildly active. So his chart looked really different than mine. I was like, oh, okay. Well, so I just feel like I'm, indicative of a lot of people in our culture today who, whose work involves kind of more sedentary activity. So
but what do you mean when you say you ended up feeling like the charts are bullshit? That's a very good, let's just tell me what you meant.
Well, it's like, that's what it does is it takes everything you did and clumps them, so it's like it doesn't show the activity throughout the entire day. And it's like, it was interesting in that it provoked for me this initial kind of sense of guilt, like, oh my God.
Right.
But it's like, I'm living an awesome life and I don't really care what that chart says. I, made some self-corrections and,
But what is a good chart supposed to look like? Like, wouldn't it be more than half sitting anyway?
Right.
Well, yeah, you're Mr. Fitbit there.
Yeah, well,
Your
because,
treadmill
I
is
still
a lot
have the
different.
treadmill desk, so like my perfect days, like the days that I feel great, or like I've done enough, is when I can try and get 50-50. But I also do the sleep thing, so
50-50 what?
50% of my waking hours are moving, 50% of my waking hours are non-moving.
So the chart still is like a quarter full because the chart
Well-
is 24 hours, or the chart
Well,
is just
it's 24 hours if you don't use the sleep function, or just I don't wear it to sleep. I just put on my bedside table.
Depends if you're looking at a bullshit town.
Oh wait, I'm struggling. Here's what I'm struggling with, and I think this is so great to just like encounter this. On the one hand, you feel like it's good to know it, and that it changed you and made you more aware. But on the other hand, you feel like it frustrated you, and you reject its message.
Well, here's-
And they're both valid, but I'd like to tease
Well, and
that
I
out a
stopped
little.
wearing a Fitbit because I was like, well, first of all, they kept kind of breaking on me, and I got tired of taking them back. So I was like, okay. And then I thought, well, I feel like I've gotten as much insight as a Fitbit is ever going to give me, and it's awesome, and I had fun with it, and I definitely recommend it to people. But I just can't imagine. It's like, you don't want to go back to that most awesome vacation place in a way because it's so special. So I was like, this thing will never give me the kind of insight that I've already
go
gotten
back to
from
the
it.
vacation place every
Oh,
year.
no.
Okay, Barry, why don't you had a question?
It got pretty much answered. I was going to ask if you had any advice, tips, or tricks for people who find themselves sitting down too much.
Well, I hear there's some very interesting research happening down
Just
south.
don't.
I think get a standing desk, and even like, so what I
Standing
still
clock,
have my sitting desk, so there are a few times where I'm like, like I really pay bills better when I'm sitting down. But like at least having a standing desk, so like just start, kind of give yourself some standing desk, and I think that's a good, give yourself some room to play and.
Were there other things where your concentration was affected by posture or by seated versus standing?
other
Like maybe you're more creative when you stand?
Right, this is
or-
the metrics thing that I was.
Yeah, I'm doing such different work now that I just feel like there's such a. But okay, I will confess this. One more thing is that I actually do a lot of my work sitting in bed now too.
There's a problem.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so
yeah,
much.
yeah,
I mean,
so
that's
anyway.
that's great, and I
So-
just think that's a great second gen talk in a sense that like the Fitbit's probably the most widely adopted self-tracking tool that we've seen kind of since we started QS. And I think there's a lot, we're still wrestling with like, okay, that pie chart, like, is that great? Is that bullshit? Like, what is it that really does for you? I love that that's kind of unresolved here. Look, thank you all for being part of this great QS meeting.